Throughout history there have been very few entrances and gates that are as feared as Traitors Gate. The entrance to the Tower of London became infamous during the Tudor period, as many prisoners who had been accused of being the worst criminals were brought to the terrifying centre of imprisonment and torture owned by the kings and queens. Traitors Gate never intended to be a formidable and terrifying place, and it was never built in that manner. But today, if standing on the south bank of the River Thames, you can't help but notice the infamous writing on the wall saying, "Entry to the Traitors Gate." Welcome to Learn With Me, and as always, to support this brand new channel, please click the subscribe button down below and join us as we look at the terrifying entrance to the Tower of London Traitors Gate. Traitors Gate initially was a water gate designed by the medieval architect Master James of St George for King Edward I during 1275 and 1279. The plan was never to make a place where criminals would be brought into the tower, as the Tower of London at the time was a royal palace and wasn't really used as a prison. King Edward I wanted a brand new water gate and a discreet entrance so he could quietly come into the Tower of London after travelling up and down the river. So it was simply an entrance which would allow the king to be taken quietly into the tower, where he would live in luxury along with his queen and his royal court. But as the purpose of the Tower of London transitioned throughout the centuries, as did Traitors Gate, it gained its name due to the increasing numbers of prisoners who were accused of treason that were taken to their place of torture and imprisonment up the river through Traitors Gate. They would typically pass through London Bridge, where they would see the heads of the recently executed prisoners which had been placed on spikes. The heads were even boiled and were then placed on spikes to keep them there longer, but even Henry VIII's fifth wife, Catherine Howard, would pass into the tower this way, passing under the heads of her former lovers. In the Tudor period, some figures who came through Traitors Gate were the Duke of Buckingham, Edward Stafford, Sir Thomas More, Lady Jane Grey, Edward Seymour, the Duke of Somerset, the future Queen Elizabeth I was attempted to be taken through there, Robert Devereux, James the Duke of Monmouth, and others all passed through Traitors Gate. Anne Boleyn has been linked to the entrance, but it's believed that despite being taken to the tower via the River Thames, she actually entered the tower via the steps next to the gate, before she was led through the Byward Tower instead of passing under the infamous Watergate. When she entered the tower, she said, "Shall I go to some dungeon?" before the Constable of the Tower, William Kingston, replied with, "No, madame, you shall go to your chambers, whereat your grace lay before your coronation." Anne was given a decent place for her imprisonment, unlike many others, but whilst in the Queen's house it was said she had bouts of hysteria and depression. She would lose her head on Tower Green, but her story as well as Catherine Howard's would help perpetuate the tales of the Tower being a brutal site of execution. The use of the phrase Traitors Gate was used from 1543, and Elizabeth I, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, was taken under Traitors Gate. She was the youngest daughter of Henry VIII, but when Mary I, her half-sister, came onto the throne, she was imprisoned and suspected of being involved in plots and rebellions. On Palm Sunday 1554, she was taken by barge down the River Thames to the Tower of London, the same place her mother was beheaded, and this would have been a terrifying thought for Elizabeth, being imprisoned within the same walls that her mother lost her head. Elizabeth initially refused to land at Traitors Gate, saying she was not a traitor, and it was a very rainy day. But she was forced to disembark there, and then went under the Bloody Tower's arch, near to where the scaffold stood that took her mother's life. Elizabeth found herself a prisoner of her half-sister, and she would have feared for her life, especially as she passed under Traitors Gate. So initially Traitors Gate began life as a water gate and a royal entrance that gave the king and the court some privacy away from the crowds of London. At times of plague and disease in London, it would also give them some protection from the public, so it would be handy in that sense. But over time, as the tower became more brutal, and during Henry VIII's reign, it became a site specifically of execution, torture, and imprisonment, rather than a royal fortress where the king and queen would stay, and the entrance from the Thames became a well-known and terrifying part of the tower's story. I feel that Catherine Howard's ordeal under Traitors Gate would have been the most harrowing and terrifying. Previously, the teenage queen and fifth wife of Henry VIII had been accused of cheating on the infamous Tudor monarch, and also of having an agreement to marry someone else in place before she married the king. She was accused of a premarital agreement signed with Francis Derham, a man she had known many years before, who managed to manipulate Catherine to secure a position at court. but she was most infatuated by Thomas Culpeper, a good-looking and close friend of King Henry VIII, and she would meet with Culpeper in secret with Jane Boleyn, organising these illicit meetings. But Catherine would have been taken from her house arrest to the Tower of London, and she must have known she would probably have been executed. She would lose her head inside the Tower of London, with an axeman taking her head clean off on a hay-covered scaffold, with hay placed there to soak up her blood. But in particular her journey to the Tower would solidify her fate if she did not already know it. As mentioned, she was taken under the heads of her former lovers under London Bridge, but she would go through Traitors Gate unlike her cousin Anne Boleyn, and this shows a transition in Traitors Gate within just a matter of years. One queen was taken under it, but the other was deemed too significant to head through it. The gate does take someone up the steps under St Thomas's Tower, and the medieval part of the infamous fortress. But Traitors Gate today is a remarkable and intriguing part of history on the banks of the River Thames, and it shows how brutal and barbaric the Tudor period really was. It had a key terror message for the kings and queens at the time, not to mess with them, and not to plot as you'd end up inside the Tower of London, tortured and imprisoned, but your head would also probably end up on London Bridge, a stone's throw away. A high proportion of people who came to the Tower under the specific entrance would be dragged up to Tower Hill and were beheaded after a period of imprisonment inside the fortress. The axeman would take the heads of many of those whose final journey was from the Tower on the short walk north to Tower Hill. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.